You're an agribusiness executive navigating an increasingly competitive market while trying to grow your company. Mergers and acquisitions are pitched as an accelerant to growth, but many M&A deals destroy more value than they create. Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches for successful mergers and acquisitions. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod. I'm your host, Joe Mosier, and as always, thank you for choosing to spend your time with us today. Now, we all know that strategy is about making an explicit set of choices. Choices about how you intend to create the company you want that's going to deliver the growth that you're seeking. These choices are things like, what are you going to focus on? How are you going to organize and sequence the work? How do you manage execution? How do you manage risk? How do you measure progress? Etc. We've been through all this before. We've all heard this before. But one of the things I've continued to observe that's very troubling for me is that in this process of making these really, high impact, high materiality, high importance decisions, we get tempted into thinking in the pretty binary terms of a choice, for example, being good or bad, or being right or wrong, or this choice is either going to create risk or manage it. And I think the reason we do this is that this kind of categorization, it's going to create the comfort that we seek amid some pretty uncomfortable choices. And it helps us, in a very simplistic way, organize an overwhelmingly complex set of factors that we're dealing with to safely say, okay, this is a good choice. This is a bad choice. We should do this. We should not do this, etc. Again, amidst all that discomfort, it creates some comfort and some perception of clarity. The problem is twofold. One, it's just intellectually lazy. Our businesses deserve leadership digging in, understanding the nuances, understanding second and third and fourth level effects of the decisions we make, and being more robust in our thinking than simply good or bad. Secondly, I think this is just ill-suited to the reality of what we're doing here, because the majority of decisions that you face are just not as simple as an up or down vote. So below the surface of these decisions that we're making around executing strategy is this idea of optionality. And by optionality, I mean, what are the ranges and the relative values of the options that this decision that you're making is going to make available to you in the near and the long term? The success of most strategies are far more optionality sensitive than we appreciate. And so today I want to discuss the importance of considering optionality as you're seeking to make the best strategic decisions for your business, and ensure that you're accounting for the opportunities and the challenges that you are likely to face in the wake of the choices that you're looking at right now and the decisions that you're going to make in response to them. So let's get started. The first thing you want to ask yourself as you're looking at a set of choices and looking to make a decision is, does the decision that we're about to make expand or constrain the range of options we expect to enjoy in the future? Or in other words, does this decision enrich or diminish that strategic optionality that we're talking about? And this is a real asset in your business. Future optionality, not being anchored to a single path, not having the room to move and breathe and respond to what the market may do. The best strategic decisions, in my perspective, at minimum, are going to maintain, but they'll ideally expand the range of future options available to you. Now, I know we all want to be decisive, right? We want to take very declarative positions. We want to create clarity. That is an admirable quality. It's something we appreciate in others. We idolize in sort of the titans of industry. But that sort of decisiveness can't come at the expense of creating options for your business in the future. Strategy execution success demands not just decisiveness and clarity, but an accounting for the fact that facts on the ground are going to change. And as they change, it's going to demand some agility from your business as well. Think about it this way. You make a set of strategic decisions. Your customers are going to respond in one way or the other. And as most of us know, sometimes customers respond in some pretty surprising ways. To the upside, to the downside, maybe they're just head scratchers. But things are going to happen, they're going to respond, and you need to have the agility to react to that. Similarly, your competitors are going to react as well. And they may react in a way that you anticipate and you're prepared for, which is great. They may react in some very different radical ways, sometimes some irrational ways. And you need to have the agility to be able to deal with that too. And as we all know, market conditions are not static, and they're going to change too. The market may not change in response to your decision specifically, but certainly amid the decisions you're making. So again, you need to be agile. And to be agile, you need to maintain that healthy optionality in the paths that you can take or the levers that you can pull along the way. The choices we make should remove risk. They should reduce or remove obstacles. They should bridge gaps, but they can't remove options. The fewer options that you have, the more captive you're going to become to all your past choices, and the more captive you're going to become to the conditions the market provides. And I think we all should know, but I'm going to just say it. Captivity is not strong footing for growth. That is not operating from a position of strength. So again, ask yourself, does this decision that we're about to make, is it going to expand? Is it going to constrain, or is it going to diminish our future optionality? The second question that I think is important for us to ask is, can you operationalize that optionality? At the start of this pod, I mentioned that the binary models that we typically use are really suboptimal when it comes to making good, valuable strategy decisions. And so I don't want to leave you with the impression that a simple rendering of does this decision give us more or less options is going to determine the value or the wisdom of a decision that you're considering. You need to move beyond just the range of optionality, which is important, but you also need to account for your ability to put that optionality to work for you. In other words, could you pull it off? Could you seize on these opportunities if you wanted to? A common example here is a company that maintains a very healthy liquidity. They've got a strong balance sheet against which they can create leverage and take on debt. And they've done a thorough market scan for where they want to grow and identified some potential acquisition targets. That's great. That leaves them with a ton of options. But the question then is, can they actually execute and pull off an acquisition and manage subsequently the integration that's going to create the value that they expect? This is what I mean by, can you operationalize the optionality? If you've been listening to this pod for even a short period of time, you know our feelings on post M&A integrations, that they're very hard, that they're very demanding, and that people routinely underestimate the demands they're going to put on the business. This all needs to be accounted for. So making the decision to acquire a competitor, that can create many future options for growth. And so from a long-term optionality standpoint, it's very, very attractive. And so if you only weigh the decision on does it create opportunities or not, it's clearly a good decision to make. But in the near term, it's going to narrow your options. You bought the business, you tied up the capital, you need to make it work. And if you cannot successfully integrate that business, if you cannot generate the returns and the growth that you expected, then you're going to struggle and come under a lot of pressure. So the value of the optionality created by the decision may be constrained indirectly if you're not prepared to operationalize it. And so that's, again, the second question you need to ask yourself. Can we actually pull this off? What's the range of optionality the decision creates? And does that optionality present something that we can actually execute against? And the third question here, and then I'd like to get into a couple of examples to illustrate these points, but the third example is, okay, fine. It creates optionality. We believe we can operationalize it. Now, can you monetize that? At this stage, you've determined that a set of strategic decisions, they not only create greater future optionality, but you also believe with high confidence, high conviction that you can actually execute against it. You can operationalize those options. Can you monetize? And more importantly, can you monetize in a meaningful way? Let's go back to the idea of the acquisition. Does the company have the confidence that post-successful integration of that acquisition, it's going to create very real and felt future economic benefit? And that means, are they going to have meaningful, ongoing run rate expense savings to the business? Right? Laying off many future expected expenses and be able to deliver through economies of scale or through other efficiencies that then are accretive to the value of the business. Is it going to create significant opportunity for you to rationalize capacity, rationalize your asset footprint, things that would help you reduce the capital intensity of your business and improve your cost to operate? Is it going to grow revenue? Is it going to grow revenue at a rate that exceeds just simply adding the gross receipts of the two prior existing companies together? Because typically with an acquisition, there's some kind of a premium that's paid. And if all you do is you say, okay, company A and company B, you add the receipts together and that's where it's at post deal and that's where it stays, what new value have you created? And so that's an important thing to think about. How do those revenues monetize in terms of greater value creation? And finally, another thing to think about is, do you anticipate that through all this expense savings and asset rationalization and increased revenues, is that going to result in widened margins on your products and services? Meaning, does that growth create growth for your business, but is it more profitable growth over the long term? And this is where this all comes together now. You make a decision that creates options rather than reducing them. It presents you with options that you feel you can reasonably execute against. And you have conviction that the options are likely to deliver a return that's going to be in excess of the cost of you going out and capturing them. And a final comment here. I intentionally structure this so that we look at execution before value, which is the reverse of how many companies generally look at it. We tend to look at what's the value of an opportunity. We get a number to it. And if that number is pretty juicy and attractive, we get wedded to it and we can convince ourselves of our ability to execute, even though we may not be able to. And so I think it's a healthy exercise to invert those two things and say, first, if we wanted to do this, do we think we could actually pull it off? Secondly, if we pulled it off, what's the value of that going to be?
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
So one more time, you haven't heard me say it enough already. Just to recap, the three questions we're talking about today are, does this decision expand or constrain future optionality? Can you operationalize that optionality? And can you monetize that optionality? I hope this makes intuitive sense, but I think it's also helpful to run through a couple of quick examples to illustrate the point, and non-M&A examples, since I know I talk about that at length, and so maybe some fresh examples. So in the first case, I want you to imagine, and these are rooted in client scenarios that we face, but I want you to envision a company that is considering litigation and legal action against a counterparty. And they're doing this as a means of leveraging them to take a more accommodative position on a controversial issue. So perhaps there's the reality, the perception of some anti-competitive behavior among market participants. And a company is looking to threaten legal action as a way of stopping that behavior, or certainly intervening to rectify it and pursue legal relief. There could be, trademark, patent, IP infringements, et cetera. There are a lot of different ways that this could show up. But regardless, the underlying issue here is that a company is threatening litigation. Now, what will this do? It'll show that you're serious. And generally speaking, it's going to get the counterparty's attention. Being served papers, being notified that you're being sued, that you're going to be subject to discovery, that the meter's now running, you need to secure counsel, that certainly gets people's attention. Sometimes that's enough. Beyond that, it's also going to require people to respond. It's going to require them to absorb some costs. It's going to create demands and friction internally. They have to form their objections to your lawsuit. They're going to have their counsel write briefs. They're going to have to respond to discovery requests. They're going to have to spend a lot of really precious time on this matter rather than running their business. And so in some cases, the mere threat may resolve issues. But let's step back for it. Let's say for the moment that it doesn't. The first question here is, does this create or constrain optionality? And I would argue in this case, it almost certainly contracts or constrains your options. Legal proceedings push you and your counterparties, kind of into a zero-sum game of winners and losers. Maybe you reach a settlement, maybe you don't. Maybe you prevail in court, maybe you don't. Maybe the suit is dismissed. There's several little things that could happen, but they're all relatively confined within a narrow band of different forms of legal remedy or outcomes the proceedings could take. What we do know is that the relationship is damaged. Any trust that you may have had is gone. And if there's any residual interaction after the lawsuit, it's going to be heavily guarded. So that's something important to consider. It doesn't mean don't ever sue anybody. It just means that in this case, that decision may actually constrain your optionality. The second decision or second thought here is, can you operationalize it? And so a company that's considering litigation should be thinking, can we fund this process over the long term? These disputes, they move at a glacial pace, right? Nothing happens quick in the justice system. But meanwhile, the meter's constantly running. So in addition to operationalizing it through a cost perspective, can you create enough pressure to compel your counterparty to come to the negotiating table? Can you bring that pressure to bear such that they're going to respond to it in a way that's favorable to you and the outcomes that you're pursuing? Can you actually construct a case, build arguments, and tell a story that's going to convince a judge of the soundness and legitimacy of the case? That's going to be really, really important. And that's about operationalizing this tactic of a lawsuit. Can you just physically and mentally sustain this effort while you are also simultaneously running your business? So I said earlier, the party that is being sued, they certainly are faced with the tension of responding to the lawsuit while running their business. But you have the tension now of managing the lawsuit, of pursuing it and running your business. And lastly, can you monetize? And this is a really important one that I sometimes think people don't think about enough is, in the event of a settlement or even you prevail in court, does any sort of award or agreement that you might reach or receive, does it offset the cost and time that was required to get there? Is it going to stack up against the cost of all that diminished focus on your business over a long period of time? Does the victory create a one-time payment that feels really good? You can feel very righteous in the moment? Or does it create the conditions for growth that you were seeking over the long term? There's a reason you entered into it. You had a vision for what you were trying to do for the business, and a one-time award greatly diminished by legal fees and time and effort might not actually be commensurate with that vision that you were trying to create. In many cases, a definitive legal win with that monetary award, it's going to permanently damage the relationship. So there's going to be very little room left for any shared prosperity among you and the counterparty in the back end. And so this is really important to think about, is that monetization of that victory over the long term is not a sure thing. So one more example that's maybe more specific to agribusiness is an example I think many of you are faced with or have been facing or have worked through in the past. So let's imagine a company. It could be a regional co-op or a local ag retailer, and they've recognized that they have the need to digitize aspects of their business, and particularly the customer-focused or customer-facing aspects of their business. So they're looking at licensing and implementing use of a new technology that's going to improve and expand the services that they can provide to their customers, access to information, reporting, et cetera. And it's meant to, again, give that value, but also create some more customer intimacy, create more customer connections, deepen those bonds, and ultimately through that grow the business. So again, let's go to the first question. Does this decision create or constrain optionality? The expected benefits are there in terms of services and interfaces with customer data. Let's look a little bit further down the road. What are the future options? Things like, are you going to be contractually encumbered to a single technology partner? And if the market introduces new capabilities that the partner that you've paired up with, if they're unprepared or uninterested in investing in those capabilities, what does that mean for you? Does this partner have a track record of, really proactive and innovative and robust API development, things that are going to allow you to layer on different solutions that you might want to adopt over time. Or even if you wanted to change your underlying ERP technology, enterprise resource planning technology, would that be something that this technology partnership would be able to accommodate? Because if it can't, suddenly you have now greatly reduced your future optionality. What is the cost of breaking the agreement? Not just contractually, if you decided it wasn't working out, but what's that going to cost you in terms of the impact to your customers? Because every involuntary change that they have to make as a result of a change in your business strategy bears a cost. And it's something you need to be accounting for. Another question you could ask is, does this partnership limit your own internal ability to invest in and build out different tech that you might identify as meeting a specific need for your customers or suppliers, employees, etc.? And so I'm not trying to beat up here and say you would never invest in technology. That's not the point. But the point is, we get really excited about what is this going to allow us to do. And we also need to think about what might this allow us not to do. So you have a more clear-eyed view on what is the true optionality that this decision will create. Second decision, can you operationalize it? So in the context of licensing a new technology or implementing a new system, despite what the demos say, the solutions are not going to deliver immediate benefit with minimal effort. At least I've never had one where you get the immediate benefit with almost no effort. So asking yourself questions of, do we have the resources in-house to properly prepare for and execute implementation? Just within the four walls of our business, are we set up to do this right, amongst ourselves? And then looking further out, are we going to be able to drive adoption across the many different functions of our business? Think about procurement and sales and operations and risk and accounting. Is this going to trickle through the entire system so that we actually can start to get maximum value for the investment? And then panning even further out, do we have the change management chops to be able to tell a good story and to be able to drive customer signups and customer adoption, all the things that are necessary for the investment to generate usage and to deliver benefits at scale? If this was all about providing better value to the customers, you need to be certain that you can implement the technology, you can drive adoptions within your business and all different functions, and that you can actually get the customers to participate to create the value that you're expecting. And so that's what we talk about when we're saying, can you actually operationalize this? And then finally, does this decision monetize? Does the optionality monetize? So think about it this way. Does successful implementation actually make financial sense and justify all the work that has to happen for us to get there? Is there a service and a value that your customers are going to pay for? Again, absent the demos, absent the customer success testimonials, which are all important social proof, your customers, have they told you this is something they want? Is it something they want enough that they assign value to it? And are they willing to exchange dollars for that value? That's one of the best ways to know if this optionality that it's creating is going to monetize. Is this likely to grow your sales? Is it going to grow your volume? And that's both among existing customers, but also new customers in the same territory, new customers in new territories and new markets. And is that profitable growth? Meaning, will that growth in volume and revenue, is it going to outpace the cost of service? Because you're taking on new costs to deliver service and value. But is it going to widen the margins over the long term? If the investment delivers sales growth, but all your costs of servicing those sales grows commensurately, then you need to assess what you need to do to either to control those costs or whether this investment is actually going to create the value that you want at all. These are examples of the kinds of questions that you would ask to say, does this optionality that we believe it creates options, we believe we can execute, but does it create value that we can monetize? So I hope the ideas and examples we discussed today are of value to you. I hope it gives you something to think about as you weigh the different decisions you have in front of you today. And remember that strategy decisiveness is absolutely critical, but that you should never discount the value of optionality underlying your decisions. Options are not created equal, and you should care about optionality, but only if it reflects opportunities that you can both operationalize and monetize. That's all we have for today. Remember to like and subscribe to the Pacesetter Pod on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to support the show, consider leaving us a review on your device right now. We really appreciate it. And it helps us get this out to more people. And if what we talked about today struck a chord with you, you can always continue the conversation by connecting with me, Joe Mosier, on LinkedIn, or you can set up a call directly by visiting Mosier Consulting Group online at mosiercg.com. Thanks for listening and have a safe day.
This is the podcastfactory.com.